Okay, if I could ask those leaving the public gallery to do so as quickly and as quietly as possible as we move on to the next item of business. And the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19194 in the name of Audrey Nicoll on protecting Scotland's rivers. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put, but I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak button, and I call on Audrey Nicoll to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, Ms Nicoll.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I firstly thank colleagues from across the Chamber for supporting my motion on protecting Scotland's rivers. And my thanks to Susan Cooksley from the James Hutton Institute and Craig McAdam and Rebecca Lewis from BugLife for their support in developing the motion. And at the outset, I want to commend the many organisations, some of which I've referred to in the motion, and individuals working hard to protect our wonderful rivers. Now, as the motion highlights, our rivers provide Scotland with stunning landscapes, a huge ecosystem of animals, plants and microorganisms. They flow from our mountains, through our glens, across our lowlands and eventually to the sea. They are the lifeblood of the landscape and central to Scotland's brand, economy and sense of place. However, our rivers are under threat, causing them to become more nature depleted than ever before. Flooding is among the largest threats to Scotland's rivers, eroding the soil from riverbanks and leading to the destruction of habitats. And as the nature champion for the freshwater pearl mussel, I draw members' attention to the findings in a Nature Scot report published in 2023 that centres on freshwater pearl mussels in the River Dee, which runs through my constituency of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine. And it found the mussel population had decreased by 90% since 2002. And for context, that's over 1 million freshwater pearl mussels lost, a truly shocking amount. Now, the report links this decline to the devastating effects of Storm Frank in 2015 that caused significant damage to the riverbed, rendering it largely unsuitable for mussels. Now, the River Dee is the only river in Scotland to suffer such a loss. However, our other rivers are similarly vulnerable. Now, whilst significant flooding is a natural and important feature of a river's hydrology, flood events used to be infrequent, occurring once in a generation. However, today we are seeing a marked increase in both the frequency and severity of floods. Now, the same climatic pressures that have led to increased flooding also contribute to water scarcity. During periods of drought, our rivers face severe stress. Reduced water levels, rising temperatures and lower oxygen concentrations combine to create harsh conditions for aquatic life. Pollutants additionally become more concentrated, further degrading water quality. Now, while all river species are affected, those unable to move, such as mussels, are especially vulnerable. Water scarcity poses a significant risk to Scotland's rivers, and this risk will grow as climate change accelerates. Now, just this year, we experienced our driest spring in 60 years, leaving the entirety of Scotland in varying degrees of drought. Now, rivers used to be able to rely upon snowmelt from the mountains to ensure healthy and cooler river levels. However, due to rising temperatures, this is no longer the case. Now, in the summer of 2018, it's estimated that 70% of Scotland's rivers experienced temperatures exceeding 23 degrees. This figure is notable as it's the temperature at which Atlantic salmon exhibit thermal stress. And concerningly, the Met Office are projecting that similar conditions could impact our rivers every other year by 2050. Now, many of our native species require colder river temperatures to live in. As such, riparian woodland expansion not only benefits biodiversity and the overall habitat, but it also provides the much-needed shade to cool our river waters. And I commend the River Dee Trust for their work to expand riparian woodland along the River Dee. This work is absolutely vital to the long-term survival of Dee salmon, Salmon, of course, host pearl mussel larvae until they drop off to the riverbed and grow into mussels. Now, many projects like this one are already supported through, for example, the Nature Restoration Fund, the Riverwoods Initiative, as it is a nationwide effort to restore and protect Scotland's riverbank woodlands, and Peatland Action is supporting the improvement of degraded peatlands across Scotland. The Natural Environment Bill offers an opportunity to establish a legal framework for biodiversity targets, including in the freshwater ecosystem. However, an even greater scale of action is urgently needed. So my call to action today is to build on the work already underway and to develop a national approach to make our rivers and freshwater populations even more resilient to extreme climate events. And further still, considerations could be given to land management policies which drive evidence-based, prioritised catchment scale management, development of riparian woodland, and the diversification of upland land use to protect our natural water stores. I believe this aligns with the recently published Scottish Environment Link report, Restoring Scotland's Rivers, that highlights 10 key areas for improving Scotland's freshwater ecosystems, including adopting a source-to-sea approach, restoring natural processes to rivers and lochs, and tackling invasive non-native species. And I look forward to hearing the Cabinet Secretary's response to this proposition. So, Presiding Officer, the future of our rivers depends on the actions we take today. The devastating decline of freshwater pearl mussels in the River Dee serves as a stark indicator that change is urgently needed. Our rivers are crucial in sustaining Scotland's unique wildlife and biodiversity. More than that, though, they are central to Scotland's brand, economy and sense of place. So, in closing, I again thank members for their support in bringing this motion forward for debate today, and I very much look forward to hearing colleagues' contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Nicoll. We now move to the open debate. I call Alexander Burnett to be followed by Emma Harper. Around 4 minutes, Mr Burnett.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I refer members to my register of interest regarding the River Dee. Now, I previously had the privilege of serving as the link species champion for the freshwater pearl mussel, and so I'm delighted that Audrey Nicoll has taken on this role, as well as bringing today's debate to the Chamber. And I support this motion, which addresses the urgent need to protect our rivers and the species that depend on them. Because the River Dee is recognised as a special area of conservation for its efforts to protect Atlantic salmon, freshwater pearl mussels and otters. And yet, despite its protected status, the River Dee remains in crisis. Wild Atlantic salmon numbers have dropped to critical levels, and Nature Scot reports a 70% decline in population over the past 25 years. Atlantic salmon are now officially classified as an endangered species in Scotland, and yet they play a central role in our ecosystem and economy. Wild fisheries contribute over £100 million annually to the national economy, supporting jobs, tourism and local businesses. And the Dee alone accounts for £15 million of that, playing a vital role in the North East economy and the constituency of Aberdeenshire West. Now, in 2022, the Scottish Government published their wild salmon strategy, but since then we have seen no meaningful action. External damage is caused by sewage spills, and yet monitoring of Scottish Water's activities on the Dee is almost completely absent. Further damage is caused by the salmon farming industry. The recent Storm Amy saw 75,000 farm salmon escaping to the detriment of wild salmon. Now, these dangers of salmon farming are clear, and I'm glad to see this morning that even if the Scottish Government won't act, the King has continued his purge of titles by removing his royal warrant from Maui, Scotland's largest salmon farm. A move described as a wake-up call by campaigners, and one I hope that spurs the government into action. But we need a positive strategy that focuses on restoring wild stocks through hatchery support and habitat restoration. And one of the most urgent threats facing Scotland's rivers today is seal predation. Seals are now frequently observed far upstream in the Dee, even as far up as Bankery, where they are causing significant damage to already vulnerable salmon stocks. And I've received a substantial volume of correspondence from constituents raising serious concerns about the increased seal activity. But to understand the issue, you must first understand the numbers. Seals eat between 4,000 and 5,000 salmon on the Dee each year, and a salmon will lay over 6,000 eggs. So the river is losing about 24 million eggs each year. The Dee's catch this year was 1,500 salmon, and its population is only 11,000 salmon. So despite 45% of the Dee's salmon stock being removed by seals, the Scottish Government has stated that seal control is unnecessary. This directly contradicts the commitments made in April 24, when Nature Scot, the Marine Directorate and Fisheries Management Scotland acknowledged the problem and pledged to find solutions by October. Now that deadline has passed, and yet seal predation continues unchecked. The Government's own third review of the seal licensing system, published in September, recognises that even a small number of seals can have a damaging impact on wild salmon populations. This same review recommends clearer guidance and more flexible licensing options for conservation purposes, specifically to address seal-salmon interaction in rivers. But feedback from an application this year showed Nature Scot views seal control as unnecessary. So I ask, will the Cabinet Secretary correct this and commit to real action? And will the Cabinet Secretary listen to Deeside and ensure that seal licensing is not just considered but progressed before Scotland's endangered salmon are added to the ever-growing list of SNP failures? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Burnett. I now call Emma Harper to be followed by Paul Sweeney, around 4 minutes. Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Audrey Nicoll for her motion and for securing this debate this afternoon. As the Scottish Environment Link Nature Champion for ponds and small lochs, I have a particular interest in today's debate, as well as being the Natterjack Toad Champion as well. But also because Dumfries and Galloway is home to some of our country's most spectacular and important rivers and waterways, from the Ken and the Dee, which is used to harness their power as part of forward-thinking hydro schemes built nearly a century ago, to the Liddel and the Sark, forming the border with our neighbours to the south for centuries. As Audrey Nicoll's motion says, the biodiversity of these waterways is absolutely crucial, not only to ensure these areas have a blossoming ecosystem, but also to ensure that we as humans are able to enjoy what they have to offer. That was not always the case. As a society, over the years, we have had a lot we've had a lot to be proud about when it comes to improving the cleanliness and sustainability of our rivers. But not so long ago, rivers like the Clyde or the Carron would have been, as well as carrying a government health warning next to their lifebuoys. We built industries not just in the Central Belt but in our more rural communities as well, that used our waterways as dumping grounds and made biodiversity a bit of science fiction. In my own region, the work of organisations like Galloway Fisheries Trust has been hugely important and a cornerstone locally of the wider work going on nationally. The existence of the Trust itself is a demonstration of how our use of river resources and conservation in our rivers go hand in hand. Without the coming together of local district salmon boards in Dumfries and Galloway, the Trust would not exist. The value to fragile local rural economies of freshwater fishing is huge, and we have a world-quality offering, and anglers from around the world come to experience it. If our waterways and rivers become biodiversity deserts, we lose not only the natural resource but also the economic benefits it brings. And groups like Galloway Fisheries Trust aren't just helping clean up water itself. They are working to eradicate invasive non-native species like Japanese knotweed and giant hogweed, both of which can have huge and devastating impacts on not only the wildlife along the riverbanks, but can destroy riverbanks through degradation and erosion, forever changing the local environment. Anyone who has tried to buy or sell a house where Japanese knotweed has been found will tell you the huge challenges it brings. And so again, while the primary aim of this work might be to protect our natural environment along waterways, it can also bring big economic and social benefits that might not always be immediately connected to biodiversity. The ongoing scrutiny and passage of the Natural Environment Bill will, I'm sure, result in an act that will put nature restoration and biodiversity in our waterways at the heart of government policy. As climate change figures more and more in our public policy and decision-making, we have to protect the balance in nature. That's what Audrey Nicoll's motion says. And the lifeblood of the landscape and is central to the nation's brand. That's a quote from her motion. So this debate today, it reminds me about all the work that Galloway Fisheries Trust are engaged in, lots of research, lots of projects. And a recent initiative by Galloway Fisheries Trust is called the Flowing Forward Restoring Galloway's Rivers programme. I recently submitted a parliamentary motion to recognise the work. And when I met with them recently, Jamie Ribbons, the Chief Executive, and the Chair of Galloway Fisheries Trust, Mark Davis, they told me all about some of the work that was going ahead. And Jamie described a local project in the River Bladnoch. And the interesting perspective was from the farmer who said the land was not productive. But when Galloway Fisheries Trust started working on the project to re-meander the river and do riparian repair and increasing the biodiversity of the area, the farmer changed his mind to what production actually means, because his mind was about productivity in terms of farming rather than productivity in terms of biodiversity and nature restoration. So Galloway Fisheries Trust have also engaged in a project of temperature checking on the local rivers, and Audrey Nicoll described that as well. And some of the temperatures have reached over 30 degrees in some of our waterways as well. So lots to talk about, and I think I'm celebrating Galloway Fisheries Trust today, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Harper. And I call Pulse. We need to be followed by Christine Graham. Around 4 minutes. Mr Sweeney.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I want to congratulate Audrey Nicoll, a member for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine, for her excellent motion for members' business and highlighting the concerns in relation to the River Dee in particular, which I think give light to wider issues about the River Basin Management Plan process in Scotland and how we are dealing with improvements to water quality and riverine protection in the country. The government's policy seems to be centred around SEPA's management of the River Basin Management Plans, but how they integrate and how they're held accountable seems to be lacking and can certainly do with greater improvement. And I had recent cause to engage with this perhaps somewhat esoteric issue through a public petition, and I think that's one of the great aspects of this Parliament, that the public petitions process can really bring to light a lot of issues that are otherwise obscured by the parliamentary agenda. And I want to particularly commend author Louise Welsh and architect Jude Barber, who have produced this amazing award-winning podcast recently called Who Owns the Clyde? And they set about, in a fairly iterative way, to establish the very complex patterns of land ownership, river ownership in relation to the Clyde. And it has unpacked a lot of really interesting aspects, and that precipitated and stimulated a public petition about the idea of creating legal personhood for the Clyde, that it would actually be a legal personality and have certain rights attributed to it. The government wasn't in agreement, sadly, with that proposal, and the petition was actually closed last week. But nonetheless, the process of discussion and the different stakeholder representations have elicited a lot of really interesting ideas. But the fundamental thing is about control and accountability. There isn't really a formal mechanism for all stakeholders, the vast amount of stakeholders actually, who might have a role to play in a river basin, to be represented in a coherent manner. And I think there is a real opportunity for further development here. We have a myriad of private owners with significant interests in control of our river landscapes and its hinterlands, but no formal obligations to engage or consult beyond fairly threadbare planning and statutory obligations, which don't often get considered in the round. They're often considered in little silos by different local authorities. So I think there is a need for greater oversight, and we could look at, for example, the way in which we've developed the national parks as a process that could be a benchmark for future arrangements for our rivers and the river basin management. In the case of the Clyde, it's got a long and complex history of originally being a trust port, and it was actually established under the River Improvement Trust of 1809. 1770 and then amended in 1809 and then further developed by the Clyde Navigation Trust in 1858, but which was then subsequently privatised in the 1990s. So that entity, that kind of River Navigation Trust, Improvement Trust, was primarily concerned with the development of industry on the river, but now we have a wider consideration that needs to be brought to the fore, and we now have in the Glasgow, Greater Glasgow and Clyde setting, the Greater Glasgow City region and also the Clyde Mission. But they have made it clear that they do not have a role in actually dealing with the preservation and protection of the Clyde. The role of preserving and protecting the Clyde is not within its remit. It is purely concerned with economic development considerations. So the question then turns to who is responsible for that and shouldn't it be joined up? So I would ask the Minister, in consideration of her response, that while she is probably likely to refer to the River Basin Management Plan process, she might want to consider, in particular in relation to the Clyde, how that can integrate better with the Glasgow City region that's been established in the last 10 years and its new role in adopting the Clyde mission, and how we can bring that together so that not just economic development considerations are brought into the consideration, that there is actually also consideration about the environmental impact and development of the river. We know that other rivers in the world have this sort of guardianship, whether it's the River Ouse in England, the River Atrato in Colombia, or the River Meuse in the Netherlands. In her 2025 book, A Barrister for the Earth, lawyer Monica Ferriatinta notes that rivers should have rights. And I think we need to recognise that emerging reality, that we need a much more considered approach to development of our river landscapes in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. I now call on Christine Graham to be followed by Willie Rennie, around 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. It won't surprise you, Deputy Presiding Officer, apart from congratulating my colleague on this debate, that most of my speech will be dedicated to the River Tweed and its tributaries. But first, I'll take a wee detour to Galloway, Old Minniegaff, Rose Cottage. It's where I lived for over a decade, with two rivers right at the bottom of my garden, the Penkiln and just beyond at the Cree. So my early experience with rivers was close and observed, with the salmon run in the Cree, the poachers at night gaffing the fish, the brown trout in the Penkiln when their dorsal fins were exposed to the air as the summer had reduced it to just a wee stream. I also saw scary flooding when the two rivers and the mill laid beyond merged into a sea and Rose Cottage's garden disappeared below the muddy waters. But I also saw kingfishers and herons. I also first encountered Japanese knotweed, not at that time considered to be an ecological predator. My love affair with rivers was born then and continues today to the grand old lady of the River Tweed. I even made a point, you might call it a pilgrimage, of going to where it is reckoned it has its source, high above Tweedsmuir, inconspicuous, with not a hint of the grandeur to come. But all of those rivers around which our villages and towns naturally grew, with the river then their dual carriageways, their source of power must not be taken for granted. From pollution, deliberate and casual, to the real and recurring threat of floods, where floods had not been before, these are two issues which require our attention, and we have come to realise that, and not before time. The Tweed itself flows 97 miles to the North Sea at Berwick-upon-Tweed, forming part of the boundary between Scotland and England. It travels in my constituency through Peebles, Innerleithen, Walkerburn and Galashiels. It's one of the most ecologically important rivers in the UK, supporting Atlantic salmon, otter, lamprey and water crowfoot vegetation. Much of the catchment is designated as an area of special conservation and site of special scientific interest. And to this day, even though textile industries, once which perched precariously on its banks, have all but disappeared, it still supports local economies through angling, tourism and agriculture, and of course it's central to the entire cultural identity of the borders. But it faces, as others, pressures from diffuse agricultural pollution, invasive non-native species and riverbank erosion. Protection and restoration are delivered through coordinated catchment management plans under the Water Framework Directive and local action plans, the Scottish Borders Habitat Action Plan and SEPA's Tweed Area Management Plan. These provide key policy frameworks protecting water quality and habitats. So flood protection is major, and while sandbanks have not quite been consigned to a superfluous sandbank pile, other more creative methods are being implemented. I reference, as I've done before, the Eddleston Water Project, where methodically changing the direction of the water by making it wind and suitable waterside planting, it has slowed its flow onwards to join the Tweed. More of that flood protection is done these days upstream. So from Penkiln to Cree to Tweed, I confess for me there's a romance about rivers. They dictated where we live today and indeed what industries we once had and what industries now. And I'm with you, Mr Sweeney. I think rivers should have rights, if that doesn't sound a bit strange. I thank my colleague again for giving me the opportunity to come in praise of and the protection of rivers, and I can't have too many debates about rivers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Graham. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Willie Rennie, around 4 minutes. Mr Rennie.
I think Christine Graham is right. There's something with rivers that gets your soul. They're really important for the lifeblood, I think, of the nation. They're important for the economy, for leisure, for the environment, for biodiversity, for climate. There's a whole range of sometimes competing demands from rivers. But rivers, I like nothing better than running along a riverside, and I've done many in the borders myself. So I concur with Christine Graham on that. And I want to congratulate Audrey Nicoll for opening the debate and for securing the motion. The Great River Dee is one of the great rivers. It is a powerful river that contributes significantly, as Alexander Burnett has quite rightly highlighted, to the economy of the area, but also to the biodiversity of the area. If there's anybody in any doubt that there's no climate change, you just have to look at water. Within the last few years, we've had ranging from devastating floods to water scarcity. And that water scarcity has had a dramatic impact on the yields of farmers. Actually, bizarrely, I thought it was going to be the vegetables and the potatoes that were going to be impacted. But it turned out in North East Fife it was the barley, of all things, that was affected in their yields, just at a time when the whisky industry was under quite a bit of strain, so was taking less of their commodity. But nevertheless, the impact of climate change is very clear. And what I think has come through this debate from all the contributions, including Mr Sweeney's, is the wide diversity of rivers. They are not all the same. They have got different topography, size, flow, the soil type, the economic value, the population that lives around those rivers. So we need different answers for every river. And I've heard many times people talking about the Eddleston, and it's a great project what they've done at Eddleston. But they keep telling me that it applies to the River Eden, but in Fife. But there are so many differences between the borders in Fife that actually we should not just take those simple and actually well-worked and successful solutions in one part of the country and think that they apply without change to other parts of the country. So I want a plan for every different type of area. And the solutions on flooding, let's take for instance, I think are very clear. We've seen from the infrastructure projects just how much money we are spending on flood prevention schemes. The cost is soaring, but we can't afford, therefore, to do that everywhere. And we need to look at the natural flood management systems. But I feel we're just not even at the races at discussing with farmers and landowners exactly what works in their area. I know it's a lot of work to get down to that level, but the river basement catchment management plans are just so remote. They're way up there. They're not discussing with the landowners at the ground level in a way that needs to be done in order to change their practice. And secondly, there's no incentives for them to change. Why would they change? They know what they know about how to work their land, and they need to be encouraged and incentivised to make changes to the way that they operate. But just now, we're not doing any changes. And 2 years after the devastating flood that I saw in my constituency in Cooper, not very much has changed. We have got lots of talk, lots of plans. We've got a Cooper flood study coming up. But in terms of actual change, I haven't seen very much. And I want to just pay finally a tribute to the river Eden Sustainability Project, who are working together with landowners on removing invasive species from that river. They are doing some really good work. It's hard work. But if we can get a partnership approach between them, the farmers, and all those who have got an interest in the river, I think we might be getting somewhere.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. And I now call on Gillian Martin to respond to the debate. Cabinet Secretary, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. What a great debate this has been. And I want to thank Audrey Nicoll for bringing the debate to Scotland's rivers. And I always like debates like this where people are really championing things in their constituency and the areas. And I agree wholeheartedly with Christine Graham and Willie Rennie about rivers being part of your identity, where you live. And obviously, I think you'll forgive me if I squeeze in some mentions of rivers in my constituency. I know I'm not really supposed to be speaking in terms of constituency, but I can't stand up and talk about rivers if I don't mention the Eithne and the Don occasionally. I'm in no doubt that members recognise the vital importance of protecting Scotland's rivers and streams, from Tay to the Forth, the Spaith, the Dee, the Don, the Eithne, the Eden, the Tweed have all been mentioned today. They support the nation's economy, thousands of jobs in rural communities directly dependent on the food, drink, tourism and recreation industries that our rivers sustain. And when there are problems with the river, there's massive knock-on effects. I'm very alive to the discussion that's just had with Willie Rennie talking about water scarcity and the impact that had on the yield and indeed the stress, the additional stress that it put on farmers who had to apply for, were basically told that they couldn't take any water from rivers over periods where there were, and in particularly rivers in the East Coast were up until recently really at very, very low levels. In terms of biodiversity, of course, the case is beyond dispute. Otters and salmons, dippers, damselflies, rivers and their floodplains support those highly diverse habitats and ecosystems. And of course, it's humans that thrive in them too. One of my most, I hope you will forgive me for mentioning, one of my most treasured recent memories of my late sister was us swimming in the frankly perishing River Dee at Cambusel-May 2 years ago. I can tell you it was not at 23 degrees on that day in the summer. I want to mention wild swimming and the destination that Scotland has become for people from across the UK to come and swim in our rivers as well, or swimming as I like to call it, wild or otherwise. It's one of the best things to do in Scotland, and of course it brings people with that new and quite trendy pastime. Scotland rivers are respected and loved by people well beyond our borders. But I have also heard today about the ongoing threats to our river environments and the species that depend on the freshwater mussel. Pearl mussel has been mentioned, the Dee salmon. And I recently met with the River Dee Trust on some of their suggestions for protecting salmon in that area. And I was very interested to hear about what the Galloway Fisheries Trust, Emma Harper's speech, mentioned the importance of river trusts throughout the country and the incredible work that volunteers do, particularly in tackling invasive non-native species. The giant hogweed is a real threat to our riverbanks, in particular, nasty stuff that is particularly difficult to handle. And of course, seeds and an alarming rate. It's almost a Sisyphean task to deal with it. And I have to commend the work that's done by River Trust in keeping that giant hogweed and other things down as well. The Scottish Invasive Species Initiative is a groundbreaking partnership as well that's led by Nature Scot to tackle alongside rivers. And it covers 1/3 of Scotland's total area. Phase 2 in 2023 was awarded over £2 million under the Nature Restoration Fund, and I'm pleased that so many people mentioned the importance of the Nature Restoration Fund, indeed the work that's been done on our rivers. It's a key lever in delivering our biodiversity strategy. It's funded numerous projects that have supported the remeandering of rivers and the creation of restoration of ponds and wetlands that enhance that biodiversity biodiversity, and I was very interested in what Christine Graham had to say about tributaries coming into the Tweed in that regard as well. There's also been work done in the River Periphery Catchment Restoration Programme near Dingwall, which is particularly impressive as well. Some of you have mentioned, some of the members have mentioned the Nature and Natural Environment Bill and the statutory targets. We'll have plenty of time to talk about what we do in that regard over the coming months. These targets are challenging and achievable, but they will be developed using expert advice and involve significant stakeholder engagements. And I would really encourage volunteers involved in river trusts to get involved in the process of scrutiny on the Natural Environment Bill as well. To Paul Sweeney, I'll take on board his comments about integrating river management with the plans. There's a lot that's happening in and around the Clyde, and certainly he may know that actually my parents are from Clydebank, and indeed the Clyde looks in a lot better shape now than it did in the 1970s. I'll take an intervention.
Paul Sweeney.
The Minister for giving way, and I certainly agree that the river has improved substantially, and you now see much more wildlife on the Upper Clyde in particular than one would have done maybe half a century ago, given how poisoned it was with the effects of a century of heavy industry. But certainly the petitioners were seeking for at least the Clyde Mission Partnership Board to be evolved from just purely considering economic development projects around the city region missions or the city region development, to actually consider a wider issue around how it integrates environmental protection as well. Maybe that's an opportunity that the Minister could look at with the city region.
Cabinet Secretary.
Certainly, and this always gives me the opportunity to mention that Glasgow City Council and its partners have been shortlisted for the 2025 Nature Scotland Award in the Nature and Climate Action category, in recognition of the innovative work they've already been doing to tackle flooding and boosting biodiversity through nature-based solutions. That also involves canals as well, of which Glasgow has many. So by anchoring the health of our rivers, streams, lochs and wetlands within our biodiversity strategy and delivery plan, Government demonstrates commitment to tackling the biodiversity crisis and protecting our magnificent rivers and species and habitats that they support. I just want to finish with one thing that I think came out of Christine Graham and Willie Rennie's contributions in particular. In fact, actually came across everyone from Alec Burnett to Audrey Nicholl. We cannot take the health of our rivers for granted. We cannot take our rivers for granted. The health of our communities is often very, very dependent on the health of our rivers, and you can see from what happens in terms of water scarcity, or indeed high levels of flooding in winter, the effects of climate change. I think Willie Rennie made that point as well. You just only have to look at the rivers to see the effects of climate change. So we have to do everything we can to protect them and to cherish them all the more. I want to finish just by again thanking Audrey Nicoll for bringing this debate to Parliament.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2 o'clock.